Welcome to Success Redefined with Dr. Toni Warner. I'm Dr. Toni, mom of 5, psychotherapist, author, and mentor. Here, you're going to find insightful discussions spanning science, psychology, and soul as the personal and professional meet, and we explore the intersection of what really matters. So success can be redefined with connection, healing, and fulfillment in mind. Today, our guest is Dr. Brent Satterly. He brings a wealth of experience and knowledge and passion to the table. Dr. B received his Master's of Social Service from Bryn Mawr College School of Social Work and Social Research in 1995 and his doctorate in Human Sexuality Education from the University of Pennsylvania in 2004. With 30 years of clinical and educational experience, he's a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as a professor. After 4 years as an adjunct professor, he received a full-time tenure-track position as assistant professor and was soon appointed to director of the BSW program, which is when I met him. And then he was promoted to associate professor with tenure. After serving 13 years as BSW program director, he stepped down and moved into a full professorship role and continues to this day to teach family therapy, human sexuality, and education courses in the BSW, MSW, and PhD programs at Widener University. He has been awarded numerous awards, such as the prestigious Lindback Award for Distinguished Teaching in 2016, the Widener Faculty Institutional Leadership Award in 2017, and his areas of expertise include human sexuality, social work, post-colonial and trauma-informed pedagogies, clinical work with the LGBTQIA+ community, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's just so much that he brings to the table. And he is someone who, when you hear him, you will know that he is passionate about the work that he does. So the topic that we're going to be talking about today is exploring how can we be fierce in our advocacy as folks who care about social justice while also staying trauma-informed and inclusive and not disconnecting from the compassion and authenticity that really is required in leadership work and in humanity right now overall. So let's go ahead and hop in. Dr. B was my professor and counselor, mentor when I went to Widener, not just for my first degree, but also for all my subsequent degrees. We stayed connected. And I have to say, the level of candor that you have, that you accompany with care, is such a delicate balance that I think a lot of people that are high achievers, people in leadership, like people that, want to do well and want to prioritize success, that they struggle with. And you do it so beautifully, seemingly seamlessly. And I love and appreciate that about you so much. And so that is such a huge reason why I feel so grateful that you are here today and willing to talk with us authentically, just being real and going deep and sharing so much of your insight and your wisdom. So I know that was a long gratitude, but I truly, truly, truly mean it. So thank you so much for being willing to take this time with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Toni. I am thrilled to be here. I have a question. Are you still overachieving? I'm thrilled to be here, and I have to tell you how incredibly fulfilling to be able to be here with you. It's what we used to always call first day, last day, right? Is that I was there when you were a freshman, first day, and as you walked into Widener University and like immediately began to plan and tackle a very ambitious, shall we say, schedule or school in your multiple majors with multiple trips abroad and multiple certifications and things like that. But also then upon graduation, moving forward into your master's and of course into your doctorate. And one of the exciting parts, and I got a chance to serve on your committee, right? And for your dissertation, I think first day, last day. And it's such a magical thing because, like most folks, you had hardships and you could have quit and you didn't. And I will tell you that one of the most amazing parts about being a teacher is that our students become our teachers. And sometimes teachers can be put up on a pedestal, and I get all of that, but we're also human too, right? And I have had my own share of struggles, my own share of hardships at times when I have wanted to quit in lots of different ways and didn't because my students didn't, and that includes you. And I don't mean that as a cop out. I mean that as part of one of the reasons why. Take for example, I after the recent presidential election, it didn't turn out the way that I hoped, and I was in pretty despairing feelings, and I had to teach class that morning, and it was the students that got me out of bed. Like, my students need me, and I need my students, and I want to get to my butt to the classroom. And it was an amazing day of pain and shared experience and looking to the future and problem solving, and of course all wrapped up with social justice. I mean, I'm a social worker. It's what I do. And so that's a big part of this work. And so in that, I guess I just want to be sure to say thank you for your hard work and not quitting. Could have, and you didn't. And I think it's really amazing when you see when I see students who like grow and just shine in the world. And it is so fulfilling as a teacher, it's so fulfilling as a social worker, but it's also just fulfilling as a person. Like, when you succeed, I win, right? And like, that's the whole, when our students succeed, like, wonderful, how fantastic. So every time I see your stuff online and in social media and in other mediums, it gives such a warmth in my heart. And you were, I mean, let's be real, you were a pain in my ass sometimes. But it's the best thing ever. And I'm sure that I was a thorn in your side once or twice. So in that, I'm super glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't just cheer me on rah rah, you challenged me. And I think that was something I had always needed, was someone that could balance the two of those, because just cheering me on feels fake to some extent,
Wow.
you know what I mean? It's all fluff. But really being willing to challenge me and also know that, you're there in my corner to be a cheerleader. In my experience and what I have borne witness to in others, that has not been the case for a lot of people to experience, professors or teachers in other walks of life. So I thank you, and I will receive your gratitude too.
I will say, one of the funny things my husband has told me, he's like, honey, I don't know how you do it. He's like, you have this almost sugar cubes with cyanide. Like, you could tell people they're failing and they'll thank you for it. And I was like, is that a compliment? I don't know, but it was
It,
funny.
it is, yes. I mean, I think that's a funny way of describing it, but I can understand. I can understand that. You shared, though, some of what you just shared really segues beautifully into perhaps how we could start
Yeah.
this conversation today. Uh, I think it's really opportune that, so you are the first recording for the second season. So this is the first recorded episode, first guest. Woo! And this recording is falling on the week of inauguration,
Mm-hmm.
and also falling on the week of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s honoring him. And I just find that so opportune because I feel like I'm just like energetically connected to MLK. So I'm regularly referencing his work, reading up, listening to his speeches. And I needed to do that again this week with an inauguration. And one of the things that I learned, I wonder if you still teach this in one of your classes, was around courageous conversations. Do you
Yeah.
remember?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
I remember it standing out to me in a very significant way. And I've carried that with me for a long time. And I revisit those words regularly. But even when I want to pull back and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a hard topic to talk about. Do I really want to broach this with this particular person or not? And I ask myself, is this a time for a courageous conversation? And I think that we are living in a time where we need to have a lot of courageous conversations. And I want to talk with you about that today
Yeah.
because I think that's a struggle. The divide is real.
Mm-hmm.
The deep hurt is real. The level of trauma that a variety of folks have experienced is real. And all of that plays into our ability to be able to have courageous conversations, let alone courageous conversations that have compassion and care connected to it.
Yeah.
But I think we need that.
Yeah. Elections are, especially in the last 10 years, have been infamously divisive and polarizing. And it's literally destroyed families and severed communities and caused so much damage and pain that to the point that I would call it trauma. And I mean, I've done a lot of work with families and individuals and students clinically, but also the reality and just the level of pain that exists within families over the political divide currently is really it's really tough. I remember an experience of after 2016 and just feeling really lost. Just to be clear, I am a left wing progressive. And while I identify as a Democrat, I'm highly critical of Democrats as well. And I think in order to be able to grow and reflect on our own limitations and in what I would frame as cultural humility, we have to have those courageous conversations and compassionate challenges in ways that are going to be important, where we can be present and have some of those discussions. Now, having said that, there's a big difference between debating something like affirmative action and somebody using a racial slur in my classroom. Like if somebody uses a racial slur in my classroom, I am throwing them the hell out, and then we'll have a truth-telling conversation with them later. But I won't abide that kind of harm in my classroom to the best of my ability. Having said that, one of the things that is probably most important in those courageous conversations is courageous conversations with myself and what it means. I am a white, cisgender, able-bodied, gay, femme, sissy boy male, right? And I'm a social work professor, U.S. citizen. I'm a cat mommy. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm an uncle. All those things, and I'm also a drag queen. So I have a lot of different aspects of myself. And if I haven't lost any of your viewers yet, just wait. The reality of it is that as a white person, I had to come to grips with my own internalized sense of racism. I supped at the table of white supremacy through my whole life growing up. How could I not have a belly full? Right? And so I had to spend a lot of time interrogating myself. And I'm not talking about beating myself up or putting myself down or anything, but I had to learn real history. And I had to learn this is what has happened in the United States of America in the past. And when we learn from history, we have a greater chance of not repeating it. And I don't think we've learned from history because I think we're going to be repeating a lot of horrible things. And I think in and of itself, the outcome of this is people want to be seen, heard, and known. That's what they want. And I was asked after the 2016 election, how do you think a reasonable person could vote for Trump? And I hated that question because I'm also a critical thinker, right? And I grew up in small town Pennsylvania, and I knew what it was like in the 80s, in the age of AIDS, right? But I knew what it was like to grow up in a town where all the jobs dried up, all the factories left town, and the only thing really left was lawyer stuff, medical stuff, some retail work, and maybe a little bit of things like automotive and farming. There wasn't a lot of jobs. And so people were really struggling. And one of the things and having grown up in a lily white small town of 3,000 people, I didn't get exposure to people who thought differently than me. I didn't get exposure to the, different cultural experiences other than through the 3 channels we had on our large box TV set or the Encyclopedia Britannica that was in the corner, And so in that way, that limited exposure really reinforced the negative stuff around racism, around ableism, around sexism that embedded itself in me. And a big part of my graduate education growing up and just my ongoing lifelong learning is unlearning and unpacking those particular internalized forces of oppression
Can
that
I ask you for a second?
yeah,
Because there's a catch-22 in there that I think a lot of people get they struggle with.
sure,
And that's your choice to be introspective
yeah,
and critically think from that space. Also, because I know, some of your background from what you've shared over the years, is I also know that you have experienced a lot of pain
oh yeah,
and you have been the victim of a lot of
what happened?
traumas in your own right and in your own way, in your own life, from a variety of different experiences that you've had. So oftentimes it's how to do this balance between introspection and holding myself accountable and doing this critical thinking about the role that I'm playing, what I need to read up on or learn about, check myself about, and then also be attentive to my own healing and my own traumas and my own victimization, and holding boundaries around what I need and what I want and what's not okay, and not tolerating the continuation of that to the extent that I'm able. The balance between the two, I think there's a lot of stuckness in one, where if we feel like we are stuck in our trauma, because wherever we're at in our healing journey, it's so difficult
Mhm.
to do the introspective accountability part, right? And then if we are feeling like we have to defend ourselves anyway, that's a whole other section we'll get to.
How about it?
That point,
Yes, completely 100%. And I'm glad you brought it up. First, I want to say yes. Like growing up in the 1980s in that small town, the age of AIDS, as a gay sissy boy, painful, a lot of trauma. And I won't go into the extent of it, but yes, I was bullied. Yes, I was abused. Yes, I was assaulted. All of those things. That was part of the hypermasculine toxic energy of it. That was just about what it meant to be an American male, right? And I did not fit that. And I learned really quickly early on that I was supposed to be straight and I was supposed to be masculine. I was neither of those things. And so that's the experience of the closet that a lot of queer people experience growing up. You try to play this role because you're supposed to. You get a lot of negative messages from the world, from school, friends, family, communities, faith communities, the government, all those kinds of things. And that toxic crap gets inside a kid. It got inside me. And I couldn't, to the point where I couldn't, I remember in my early adolescence trying to practice saying the words, I'm gay in the mirror, and then being so filled with so much shame that I could not look at myself for it's a unique challenge for a queer kid. And I'm also like a white, able-bodied U.S. citizen, and I'm a man, and all those kinds of things. So I have a lot of, here's a buzzword that some folks don't always like, but it's true, privilege. I had a lot of privilege. The unearned, invisible, undeserved granting of power or status, right? That's what that is. And I had a lot of those things. And I think one of the big challenges is growing up in a small lily white town in a household that was often abusive, and there was addiction, and that initially I just ended up pushing a lot of my stuff down, and certainly didn't even until later in college and grad school really do some personal interrogation of some of those what I would consider racist, sexist, even homophobic messages, that I had to unpack in order to become a more whole person, much less a social worker. And so, it would have been easy for me, Toni, to get caught in victimhood.
yeah,
It would have been super easy for me to get caught in victimhood. Not only was I beat up, not only was I regularly attacked, not only was I like in places that are supposed to be safe, and it was what I used to call the in-betweens, the idea of when adults weren't present in my world, then that was the time and space when adults were absent, like at the bus stop or in the hallway at school or walking home or in the locker room at school. I mean, all those kinds of places and spaces were dangerous places for me, and I survived. That's what often kids do. A lot of kids don't survive. A lot of queer kids don't survive because they often will run away or take their own life, or certainly drinking and drugging, cutting themselves in some ways because physical pain sometimes is easier to feel than emotional pain. All that stuff, and so growing up, it would have been really easy for me to continue to be the victim, but I'm really grateful that I had education as part of my and people that in my life who loved me. Like, just a shout out to my folks, my parents, my mom and my dad always expressed their love for me, but the hatred of queer people was so loud on the outside that it overpowered the message that they loved me and I was going to be okay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's just the reality. And I can't even imagine now with like this, and access to the internet, all that constant stuff, just a lot. But I do believe that there is a balance there. There is that has to, where somebody has to decide, like, how long do you want to be a victim? Like, you have a right to heal.
Right.
You have a right to heal in your world. And you have a right not to feel like shit when you get up in the morning and walk around, and you have a right to, like, have all of your feelings. One of the things that's been really helpful for me growing up is I've always been taught, to think of my body as just like a body of water, and feelings are like fish that just flow through me. They don't stay, they just flow through me. And so they're impermanent. And that has always been really helpful, because even when I've been like, I feel terrible. So okay, I won't feel that way maybe tomorrow, that kind of stuff. And that I had the ability to do that, I feel really appreciative of. And a lot of that had to do with my role models and family members in my life.
So, what would you say for someone who has experienced trauma and maybe they are feeling very unsafe because since the inauguration,
Yeah.
and maybe they're feeling very righteous since the
Oh,
inauguration, because we know there's trauma on both, and I'm going to use air quotes, sides,
right.
because I'm
Mhm.
not huge into the categorization, but I know there's a place for it. How do we how do we how do we support folks in doing that? Clearly, we can't do it for anyone. I certainly can speak from my personal experience. I know when I started out as a clinician, I wanted to help everyone, and they call it green, the green therapist, but
Okay.
had to learn that I can't,
Yeah.
and that's been a failing on my part. And it's not a bad thing, actually, because we all deserve our own like our own autonomy,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
and in order for the healing process to really have the depth that it needs to have for it to be sustainable, the impact to be sustainable, the person needs to engage in it on their own. They need to make that conscious choice to do that. So I know we can't do it for folks,
Yeah.
but I'm for sure, I know that there are folks that are going to listen to this and they're like, but so and so hurt me, or the system has
Oh,
oppressed
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And you and I both know we've experienced that as well.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what would you recommend? How could they successfully support their own healing while also trying to show up in these courageous conversations that need to be had in some way?
So I think one of the things that comes to my mind is the real concept that that is overused a lot, but I think is actually really valid, is the whole concept of forgiveness.
Mm,
And I'm sure people like, like some of your listeners are like, get out of here, that kind of stuff. Like, and I'm talking about significant forgiveness of people who have harmed us tremendously. And I'm not talking about somebody just called us a name, right? I'm talking about abuse. I'm talking about trauma. I'm talking about difficulty and great pain. And I think that is one of the things that sometimes can be connected to actually the polarization that we see culturally, because it's so easy in our brains to just do a lot of black and white thinking, like dichotomous thought process. And that, people are either all good or all bad, that kind of thing. And I think that kind of almost simplistic formulation of thought can be really can be too it can erase the complexity of human condition. Like, human beings are complicated, contradictory creatures, and we don't have, you know I don't think we have the luxury of just to see truth in things, to say, okay, it's only this is the truth, capital T. And so when I think about people who've been harmed and the notion of forgiveness, it ends up being incredibly painful for some folks, because it can feel like, if I forgive that person, you're asking me to condone their bad behavior.
Yep. That's a big one.
And of course not. Of course not. What I'm talking about, and that's a process, right? You gotta, balance the scales. Like, my stepmother once, when my ex was like, I was grumpy about him. I was having so much pain. She's like, well, you can just hate him. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I could. But it's the whole notion of balancing the scales of, like, how much energy does it cost you to be bitter and angry, for your whole life? And my father used to call it, like, it's sucking a lemon drop, like your face turns into a cat's ass, as they say. And the whole that's a drag queen joke. And the whole idea is that the notion of, you end up like being angry like this all the time, your whole everything is pinched. And often in midlife, carrying around that much rage and righteous anger is exhausting. And it's this burden that holds people down. And the notion of forgiveness isn't about condoning bad behavior. It's about giving yourself the gift of letting go.
Yes, it's a release. It's a
Mhm.
release of it. You just reminded me of a quote. I want to pull it up, an MLK quote that I was reading this week.
Yeah, yeah.
He said, "It is purposeless to tell Negroes," and we could insert any, majorly oppressed individual or group here, or traumatized individual or group. So it's purposeless to tell the oppressed not to be enraged when they
Mhm.
should be. Indeed, they will be mentally healthier if they do not suppress rage, but vent it constructively and use its energy peacefully but forcefully to cripple the operations of an oppressive society. And that is just, I
Yeah.
we need to read that. We all need to read that and then reread it. So he used peaceful and forceful right next to each
Yeah.
other. And we think of that in such different terms nowadays, but that was ringing in my head while you were just speaking. It's
Yeah.
not that we're saying you can't feel anger,
Yeah. Of
because
course.
you have a right to it, right? And you will feel anger on your healing journey, especially
Yeah.
if you've been suppressing it for years. What are we going to do with that anger? How are we going to channel it? And also, is it taking the driver's seat from you, right? And steering your decisions and your life direction? Or are we able to notice it, become aware of it, and manage it in a way that's healthier?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's so challenging there is, forgiveness doesn't mean erasure of anger. Like,
Mhm.
but again, people want to be seen, heard, and known. Validation. Like, people need that validation. Like, you were right to be angry. That person's behavior was terrible. It was bad. You were just a kid. I mean, all of those kinds of things that we know that we do when we're doing trauma work. As a, as people, like, share more of their own stories, share their pain, share their experience, it gets less. It gets less. It gets less. I mean, we know that, like, Virginia Satir in communications therapy talks specifically about the whole notion of that kind of catharsis and what it means to share those things. Now, I'm not talking about primal screaming, although some people do that kind of stuff, or rage work or what have you. But what I'm talking about is being seen, heard, and known. And to because so often, so many people, especially wounded kids, are not, especially queer kids, or other oppressed communities whose life experience isn't validated or erased, or as and we're there are, today we're grappling with what now President Trump has said, that there are only two genders in the United States, and there are a whole slew of people who identify other than as man or woman, including not just socially or social constructively, but biologically. There's this thing called intersex, and but it's one of the challenges. And when we're talking about forgiveness, we're also talking about not just letting go, but taking our own power back. And what does it mean? Because if we're letting that person control our lives, like our rage and all of those kinds of things, what does it mean to release it and release that kind of thing? Now, it doesn't mean we should sit on our butts and not take action to right this wrong and correct it and all. Absolutely, that's justice work, right? And I think that's an important part of anybody's healing journey. It's one of the reasons why we see a lot of people who've lost a loved one to some kind of tragic accident over like drinking too much, all that kind of stuff. Who knows? And then we'll go about doing some kind of educational programming for youth who are struggling with alcoholism, all that kind of stuff, right? And so in that sense, I think it's important. And in the interest of being authentic, you said one of the things that you wanted to do was like hear some stories. So let me tell you a story. And and this involves self-disclosure, so which I think is important. And I'm I having grown up obviously with my own history of trauma, lived in an alcoholic household with a stepfather who was very abusive, Vietnam vet, really struggled, PTSD, all those kinds of things as an adult. And I've worked through a lot of those struggles. And I can see he was very sick. He was a very sick man who was really wounded and harmed, and then wounded and harmed my family a lot and me a lot in that process. I couldn't have said that to you, you know, like 35 years ago. There's no way. But I think one of the things that it's not surprising to me that as I grew up and when I was wounded from something similar in college, when my heart was broken, I turned to alcohol. And that's not surprising, right? A lot of members of my family biologically, but also just members of my family by marriage, struggle with alcohol. And my brother passed away of the disease when he was 40 years old. Like, and it my older brother, and it just the the gift that he gave me was one of, Brent, this is what could happen to you, right? And so and that was, I'm a gay man who's in the closet, and I'm really good at denial and compartmentalism, like putting things into teeny tiny boxes and just pretending like the denial to see a truth. Like, I'm really good at that. I've got 20 plus years of practicing it. And so it's not surprising to me that denying that I was an alcoholic really helped me to be able to function in life and be a relatively functional alcoholic. And it was a lot of fun for a long time. And as a gay person, gay bars are sacred spaces.
Mm.
And so going into gay bars, when I came from a very hostile religious-based college environment, a very hateful small town growing up, and where a lot of the people in my life were also dying from HIV, gay gay bars were sacred and safe spaces where I could be flaming, where I could see like men kissing and drag queens performing, and there was gay Sunday brunch with booze, there was AIDS benefits with booze, there was gay pride with booze, there was happy hour with booze. And it is not surprising to me that I ended up connecting the experience of alcohol with the experience of unbridled queerness. And of course what ends up happening with addiction is it's progressive, right? And it was fine for a long time, it was a lot of fun, like I said, until it wasn't.
Yep.
And that's what happens with addiction, is that it's progressive, and it was magic, and then it was medicine. Like, I needed alcohol to feel normal, and then it was misery because I was having anxiety attacks. I was, having to do all kinds of things to deal with trying to keep on top of work, much less my personal life. It was a mess, and I still did not want to stop. And that's the thing about it, is that when addiction ultimately makes it so that the most important thing in your life is that substance. more important than parents, than children, than spouse, than job, than safety, more important than all those things. It's insidious. And I think one of the things that it was so hard is being given what's sometimes been called the gift of desperation and brokenness, which I have been given, for which I am incredibly grateful. And happy to say that I just celebrated 5 years sober, which I'm thrilled. Yay! But and it's life beyond my wildest dreams. It's the best thing ever. And so when I tell you, Toni, that I wanted to quit, I wasn't kidding. And it was my students, my nieces and nephews, or nibblings as we call them, because we have non-binary kin as well, and my husband and my parents. I mean, people who loved me, and I'm so grateful for all of them, because nobody could get me sober. That's not the only person who get me sober is me and my relationship with my higher power, our higher powers. And there's lots of different paths to sobriety and all that kind of stuff. I just remember walking into a room at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning in the bottom of this church basement into a Boy Scout room of all places, where it was, and I was surprised it didn't burst into flames, but I smelled, I was gross, it was disgusting. And 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 the people there just accepted me and loved me with open arms, from all walks of life. And so one of the ways you talked about, like, balance in this is that at the end of the day, people are wounded. We've been wounded in our lives and make stupid decisions, including voting for people who can be harmful, right? And maybe they later regret it. I don't know. But the reality of it is that people make decisions that are harmful and do things that are harmful. And I'm not interested in carrying that bitterness against other people for the rest of my life and turning over my peace of mind and serenity to somebody else. I didn't get sober to be angry. I didn't get sober to be bitter. I didn't get sober to resent, somebody in Washington, D.C. I got sober to survive and live a magical life. So I get to do great things like this podcast with a former student who is now like a major star, and all that kind of stuff. So the reality of it is that um, pain is human beings have pain, and when I'm able to see people as wounded and not evil, it makes a huge difference in how I frame them in my brain, and it short circuits the polarization. And people have the capacity to grow and change. There's a concept known as crystallization, where we freeze people in time. Somebody hurt us, so we freeze them in time, and I haven't spoken to them for 7 years, and I see them again, and all the rage comes back. We're the same mother ever, all that kind of stuff. And the reality of it is that they might be a very different person now. I know I am different from 7 years ago. And for that, I'm very grateful. And I think that's a big part of healing.
That's beautiful. And I'm so glad you shared that, because there's so many pieces of that. We could probably have 5 seconds. But the one is, when you say addiction, I think that if we can also frame that, and you chime in if you agree or disagree, if we can also frame that as we become addicted to the unhealthy ways that we cope, whether it's drinking or something else, right? At othering.
Sure.
And that is part of what can keep, I think, people stuck. So for me, I had become addicted to action. And that sounds great because I accomplished a lot, right? However, it also eventually made me create a lot of codependent relationships, and why myself denying that I'm in an abusive relationship, because how could I do that? Or deny that I'm actually feeling stressed, because how could I feel stressed, right? And so it can lead us to put on blinders.
Yeah.
And when we put on blinders, we can stay comfortably there in that zone, operating under that lens, that framework that we're used to operating, even if it has detrimental effects. Like you said, you were experiencing misery for a while before you were ready to commit to that healing journey. And then the healing was and is a journey.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, all right, I'm ready. Oh, we're all done.
Be better. Can we be better now? No. Nope.
Yes. So
So
we have folks, right, that some that are that believe this administration is going to somehow magically make things different in a positive way, and then folks that are truly feeling fear.
yeah.
Both have their own addictions that aren't healthy in some way, right? That are making them put on these blinders. So if we want to have a courageous conversation with someone that's on the other end, do you have any either examples or ideas about what can help folks that have their own healing journey to embark on? What can help them do that? Because it can bring up a lot of emotion, and it does
Oh,
bring
yeah.
up a lot of emotion.
So I was privileged to be part of the U.S. Surgeon General's consensus project years and years ago, specifically on sexual health, and it was bringing together very disparate organizations that represented different points of view on sexual health, from Focus on the Family, which is a very like right-wing conservative, to the Heritage Foundation, which is also right-wing conservative, to the Eagle Forum, which is right-wing conservative, to Planned Parenthood, to SICUS, to Widener, which are often thought of as much more left-wing progressive. And we came together for this conference. Boy, that was quite something. There's a very limited group of people. There were like specific tickets, and I feel very privileged to have been able to go. And they did like some stuff like large group things, which to me were not effective at all, because when you'll get boos, you'll get yays, and all that kind of stuff. It reminded me of Congress. Like, what's the point other than for animosity building? For me, the real change is, and where I think was incredibly helpful, was when we were separated into partners. And so I was partnered with this person from Focus on the Family, and he was like, I'm so and so, I'm so and so, and I introduced myself. And Focus on the Family is a very right-wing religious organization that specifically focuses on Christianity and their frames of what would be considered traditional Christianity, the understanding of family as a male, woman, man, woman, child, all that kind of stuff. Man is the head of the household, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly anti-abortion, and certainly anti-gay and those kinds of things. And and I said to him, look, I said, it's no secret that we have different points of view in the world, but the only way that we're going to be able to create change for our communities, plural, is to build relationship. And it's like, on the national scale of things, to me, that seems like not a waste, but that's not really where we're going to affect change. I was like, what if you and a member of your family, if your wife or whomever, come over to our home and we'll have dinner? And he said, I think that's the first time a gay man's asked me on a date. And I said, that you know of. So, and it was that, and he accepted. And the sad part is that later it was found out that he did this, and he was fired. And the reality of it is that we cannot underestimate the resistance that exists systemically. And here's my social worker coming out. We cannot, this systemically, for other folks to control, who want to control us with regard to thinking, feeling, believing, and those kinds of things. And they do that with things like fear mongering. They do that with what I would say lies in the media. They do that with rhetoric, all that kind of stuff. We've just seen tons of that in the most recent election, right? We've seen tons of it. But to me, to be able to sit down with people who have a different point of view, the first thing I think is really important to do is be in a good space. Like, if you're not in a good space, it's not going to go well. Number two, calm your like belly muscles, like relax your belly muscles. When your belly muscles calm down, and you take deep breaths, then what's called the pubic coccygeal muscle, also known as the PC muscle, the muscle that contracts and cuts off the flow of urine, that can relax as well. Make sure you don't have to go to the bathroom. And so if you do those things, then you're more grounded, and and then ultimately your heart symbolically is more open, right? Now, before you even do any of that, you have to decide if you're in a space where you can have a conversation that's not going to be damaging to you. Because for some people, that is the case. I am not advocating for people to sit down with folks who are abusive. No, just don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth your time. Don't do it on social media. Don't do it in person. Don't do it on the phone. Just don't do it. But if you're talking about, let's say, a family member or a loved one, that might be useful. I would also suggest, some of the basic stuff besides things like I statements and, not attacking, and what it means to listen to someone and try to listen actively with them while not formulating a response in your head. Like, it's hard not to listen to respond, but just listen for listen's sake, and then turn it around in your mind and think about it and ask questions, and then kind of go from there. Having said all of that, I don't believe when people hold beliefs about the right for me or mine to exist, I won't have conversations with them. It's too painful. And I'm talking about, folks who hold beliefs that queer or trans people or non-binary people are evil, that they are sick, or, because of that, there's just no point. Like, that's not.
Your line, right? To know,
Yeah.
yes, I can have a courageous conversation. And also, I'm only going to do so if it's going to be safe and fruitful in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. And I think and that's different for everybody, right? Some people would be like, you can't ask me to give up my family. I'm not asking you to do anything, right? What I'm saying is that when you can have fruitful conversations with, and to help, because relationship is where healing happens, right? And relationships are what we know, like, change hearts and minds. As you build relationships with communities that are different from yours, you grow. That's when you get to a place of being able to be introspective and self-reflective and do some of that personal interrogation that I talked about at the top of the hour. Because, like, we're only responsible for our reactions. I'm only responsible for, like, what I think, and I believe, and I behave, and what I say and how I say it. I want to be the best Brent I can possibly be. I didn't get sober to be an ass. I got sober to be better.
Healing is work.
Yes, it is work.
It takes effort. It really is.
Every
Oh my
day. Every day.
It really is. We moved, my family and I moved, an interracial, interfaith family that I have.
Yeah.
Moved a couple years ago to an area that is significantly less diverse than we lived before. And my daughter was in 8th grade when we moved, which is a rough age to move in general. But when you move and you're one of the only minorities and you're, female and blah, blah, blah.
That's not cat.
Yes, it is. It's the first one. The first one. Back in the day. I know. I still remember that conversation we had with pregnant mother. But so it was a really, really rough, incredibly rough year with racist issues happening, and that affecting, her mental health, affecting me as a parent about how can I support her. And so fast forward to this year. It's been 2.5 years since then. They created a new, like, parent advisory board. I am on it. I was chosen to be on it. There's like 25 of us total for the whole district, and I'm the only minority on the entire, right. It's indicative, right, of what we have here. So last night, for the first time, I shared some of the racial issues that we had experienced. And there was a man there older white man, straight, seemingly conservative from some of the commentary that had been made over the past couple meetings that we had. And at the last meeting we had made some commentary about kind of being careful as an advisory council not to try to advocate for what we think should be, like diversity and racism issues and things like that. And so he came up to me at the end of last meeting yesterday night after I shared a bit about some of our experience. And he said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yes." And we talked. And he shared with me some of his own personal stories of when he was a child and how he started, not until he was adult did he start to see the ways in which racism was introduced to him, and that he believes that, you know, if we stop talking about it so much, it won't be such a problem. And in our conversation, only through courageous conversation, where I noticed if I was or was not getting activated and being able to check in with myself and support myself and saying what I call core connected, or what you were saying is grounded, was I able to continue that conversation and share some of my experiences while receiving what he had to say. We had a very fruitful conversation where we both ended the conversation better understanding one another's perspectives without either one of us feeling attacked. So we both had a curiosity component that allowed us to ingest more, learn more, and now be able to be more productive as well together towards a common goal. That is relational. That's the power of relationship.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I really echo. I'm really glad you talked to the notion of core collected. So sometimes I will also do it with a, woo, where I will, cast a shield around me, right?
Mm.
And I often will have like a little stone in my pocket of some kind that to me is that imaginary, like there's that shield that's around me where someone else is like, if I'm, if for some reason I'm having a difficult conversation with someone and a lot of the stuff they're spewing out is what I consider bigoted or even poisonous, that toxic stuff won't touch me. And that is very important because it helps to then have further conversations as necessary. Like I said, I wouldn't have conversations if people are being abusive, but I think being able to have that kind of shield up to, navigate and not in, for lack of a better word, ingest or absorb that kind of negativity, but rather to be constructive in a way that you end up building relationship for like for your common goal. Like ultimately, I'm sure it's about making sure that the space that you all have for your kids is safe and good and healthy, and they can learn and grow. And I mean, that's the point, right? And so that's an important part of it. I will say that it's incumbent upon me. Like I'm very concerned about the level of safety for our kids in light of President Trump's executive order about immigration, seeing immigration as invasion, and having ICE police go into our schools, and the frightening part of what it means to have to help kids prepare ice packets and keep them in their bags, like with their passport and their birth certificates, because if they go in they need to practice showing their passport to make sure that they're a citizen. Those are terrifying things that will traumatize children. And when confronted on it, that border czar said, tough, we got to get the kids, then we can get the parents. And to me, that's just incredibly damaging and hateful and xenophobic and all those kinds of things. And so I'm very frightened for the ways that this happened and what it might mean for the future. And I think alarm bells are very appropriate and the rise of this kind of what I would call fascism.
As we come to the closing portion of our conversation today, I would like to ask you, as a social advocate who is feeling fearful of some of what is happening in our world, but specifically within America right now, who acknowledges that you have privilege and also you've experienced depression.
Yes.
Both can be true at the same time.
Yes.
Do you define success as a leader right now in this time? Success, being a leader right now in this time for you.
It's all about the students. Like it's all about the students. I like to say I'm student centered and all that kind of stuff. And my students are my teachers, as I talked about. But the notion of what it means for success as a leader in my work is to be able to speak my truth and make sure that, especially like queer people, need to hear other queer people say,
Mm.
hey, I'm here. And, I know that some of us are not okay. My trans friends are not okay. They are not okay. And and the people that love them need to hear other people who have some of the social trappings of what might be considered success. I have tenure, I'm a full professor, all those kinds of things. And so people sometimes look to me to speak that, and it's important that I do. That's a part of, because silence is dangerous. I go back to ACT UP, in the 80s and 90s, like silence equals death, folks. We've learned that. We know that that's true, and they're counting on fear. And so, in this, for me, what it means to speak your truth in a way that's going to be effective, and in a way that's going to be just, in a way that's going to be compassionate. Yeah, if I can do that, then that's good. The thing that I think is most important is my students need to know I care about them. Like, they need to know that, well, let's just say this, they need to go, I give a shit. And when students know that I care, they're much more likely to reach out to me for help, in order for helping them to be successful. And honestly, sitting here with you like makes me feel like, damn, I'm good.
Oh, you're amazing at what you do.
No, but just, I
You
mean,
better feel that way.
about right narcissism, but the reality of it is that it's so affirming to me about the kind of good that you're doing in the world, Toni, because how can that not feel good for me? My success, your success is my success. How fantastic. And that's a win-win. And finally, I will just say that, hey, if you could be kind, why not?
Mm.
Why not? You know, if it, and I'm not just talking about dumb stuff like, we hopefully holding the door open for someone. All that's good, but do some kind things and don't tell anybody. Like, just do some kind things in the world and don't tell anybody, and it will give you a good feeling here. We need that.
We
We
do.
need that.
We do. I want to close us today with two MLK quotes that I think connect with what we've talked about, and also in honor of him this week specifically.
Please.
Two quotes that I was reading this week that I really like. He said, "I become convinced that non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good." And I think that what you have shared complements that as well. And the other quote is, "We who engage in nonviolent direct action, we are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive." And that speaks to a part of me pretty significantly, that, oh, we won't bring something up because we want to keep the peace. But really, that's not keeping the peace. What kind of peace are we talking about? Or that's not the kind of peace that we need. That's not the kind of peace that we want. That silence that you spoke of earlier. So sometimes if there's tension underneath, it needs to be brought to the surface so
Yeah.
that we can work with it, so that we can address it, right? And do so in an intentional way. Thank you so much for being with us. If anybody wants to connect with you, is there a place where they would go to connect with you?
So, I mean, you can always email me. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I wish I had a website. I don't have a website. So I know everyone's like, you should get a website. I'm like, I know. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. No. But email is basatterly@widener.edu. B as in boy, A as in apple, S as in Sam, ATTERLY at Widener, WIDENER.edu. Or you can look me up on Blue Sky at Halloweener Queen. And I'm currently on Facebook and Instagram as Brent Satterly. I'm not sure if I'm going to stay there or not, given the political realities of things, but we'll see. Regardless, and you can always look me up at Widener. I'm under faculty under the Center for Social Work Education, for which I'm very proud. I've been there since like the 20th century, so I'll be around.
Oh, thank you so much.
Dr. Toni, it's a privilege.
Oh my gosh, my privilege. My
So,
privilege too. So,
thank you.
Links related to this episode can be found in the show notes section. Want to submit questions about success, satisfaction, healing, and relationships, health, or work? You can do that free and anonymous at drtoniwarner.com, where you'll find other resources there as well. Did you benefit from this episode? You can subscribe, like, and share with another to pass it on, because anyone can listen on the go with this podcast audio available on all major podcasting platforms.